couple of months as you're preparing to get your garden to bed. And it is a little bit more than just throwing some mulch on and taking care of a few pruning issues. So just to get started. So we're going to be settling in for a long winter. We have a very, very short gardening season. It starts in late May, and I'm sure most of you that have a garden, you really don't start planting until around Memorial Day. And our first frost date is actually September 21st for the lower tier of New Hampshire. For the northern tier, it's even earlier than that. So your summer is very, very short. So we do get to thinking about putting this garden to bed at this time of year. This isn't just about watching over your plants and making things tidy. By doing some of these things, you will prevent disease and pests from coming into your garden next year. So we'll talk about what you should be doing in September with your lawn, what you need to do with trees, shrubs, and other deciduous plants, and pruning and mulching, soil testing, and harvest time. Your lawns. Now is the time to fertilize with a product low in nitrogen, high in phosphorus. Nitrogen encourages a little bit of low growth. You want to maybe not have the spurt of growth now. You want those roots to get going, but not the blades. So you want to keep your garden, your lawn actually growing, but very slowly. You want to turn back your automatic irrigation system if you have one. You don't need as much water now. It's not as hot in the day. The air is cooler, so it's not drying off as quickly. You have a dew point that's a little heavier. So you do want to make sure that you turn back your irrigation system so you're not over-watering your lawn and making it all soggy. That also promotes things like mold in the snow and before the snow season comes. Any seeding that you want to do should be done probably around September 15th. That's about the latest. That gives your seedlings, or the new seed, plenty of time to establish their new roots and fill in before the real serious hard freeze hits. It also helps you to control your broadleaf weeds. And we'll see in another slide some broadleaf weeds that you don't really consider or maybe not think about. You can actually run a late October, and we'll see that a little later, a late October feeding for the grass, but you can prevent some of these weeds from coming back by helping to promote growth in the fall. If you have any kind of fungus in your yard, if you've had any fungus in your yard, those are not the clippings to leave on for mulching. Those are the ones that you want to take up and just put them aside. They can probably go to your trash because they're not good to put in your compost either. And at this time, you can also take your mowing height down. In the summer, we tend to leave up that mower blade to like 2.5, 3 inches, and that allows the grass lots of room to grow, lots of room to get all kinds of air and nutrients. But in the fall, we tend to take it back a little bit because the grass doesn't have as long to dry, and if you leave it long, it can promote mold, disease, and pests. And at this point, you can't really control your crabgrass in the fall. It's already there. It's done its job. It's not going away. The best time to get that is early spring, before it has a chance to grab hold. Because once the crabgrass gets hold in your lawn, that's it, it's over. So you really want to take an inventory, go around your lawn and say, okay, I know I have really bad crabgrass here, and make sure that that area gets treated very early in the spring so that you have the pre-emergence go on and it'll never come up and never give you a problem. A lot of people sometimes like to leave their leaves on the lawn, and that's not a good practice. It's not really a mulch when it's on your lawn. It ends up matting down. It can cause all kinds of diseases, but mostly mold, and it also will flatten the blades of grass and make them less available to like nutrients and things. And the other thing you can definitely do at this point in the season, the grass is growing slower. So if you edge your sidewalks and driveways in late September, then you can kind of get a jump ahead on spring. It won't grow over, and that way you will have nice edge sidewalks and driveways for the spring. This is a photo of some broadleaf clover and fescue. broadleaf clover is considered a weed. So again, this is one of the things that you want to look for in your lawn. If you have lots and lots of patches of this, you want to make a note of it so that you can go ahead and make sure that you get that treated very early in the spring, and that way it'll reduce the amount of broadleaf weed. The more healthy your grass and the lawn turf, the more weed control you have, because that grass will take over. The weeds take over, the grass doesn't grow, but that works both ways. In planting, it's a good time to start dividing a lot of your spent blooms. It's also a good time to divide hostas and daylilies. Those flowers are pretty much gone, and you can dig deep and divide, and then you can replant. It's also a good time to plant trees and shrubs, but you have to remember they're not getting the same kind of water, and you want to establish a really, really strong root system before the ground freezes. So it's a good idea to water those at least once a week, very, very deeply, to get the roots really growing and feeling alive, so that when it comes back in the springtime, you have a healthy shrub. I had a tree that was moved last fall, and the folks didn't plant it right away, and when it finally went in the ground, it was a little late in the season. It had already lost a lot of its root ball from the rain, and lo and behold, this year, this spring, it did not come back. So you really need to make sure that when you have a tree, you get it in the ground as soon as possible, get it watered, and get it going. Great time to plant those fall ornamentals if you have them, if you like to have them, mums and asters, ornamental kales and sedums, and we'll take a look at a few of these. That's just a nice field of mums and asters planted beautifully, so they will be green most of the summer, and then about now they start showing their flowers. This is an ornamental kale. There are different varieties of this. It is edible, but I know some people just like to grow it for the way it looks. It's got a nice curly, leafy, low to the ground look. And this is another variety. So if you plant it in mass, it kind of has a nice uniform look. These are tall sedums. They are a succulent, so they do like the water, but they are really, really good in rock gardens. They like to be in shallow root areas, so they really do a wonderful job if you have a rock bed or you don't know what to plant somewhere it's very shallow with the soil. These will grow, as well as their other cousin, the low-growing sedums, and they do get very beautiful flowers on them. They're very pretty during the year. During the summer, they're green, and then about this time of year, they start to really show their flowers, beautiful flowers. Pruning and mulching. Stop the deadheading of a lot of the roses, any rugosa roses, if you want the rose hips. The hips, and I have a picture of it in a few minutes, the hips can be used to make jellies and teas. So if you do have those rugosa roses, some people call them beach roses, if you leave the flowers on, they will turn around and produce a beautiful hip for you. You want to prune any late summer flowering shrubs. Those shrubs, you don't want to prune too heavily. You want to take off all the dead wood. Anything that's dead and dying, it's not going to come back. You might as well just take it out and put it in the compost and then encourage the new growth. Any flower clusters from tomatoes. I don't know about you, but my tomato plants all had blight this year. So my tomato production was very sketchy, to say the least. The ones on the top, though, after where the blight stops on the new growth, I keep getting flowers. There's a lot of flowers right now on my tomato plants. But I don't think I'm going to get any tomatoes from them. It's too late. So if I pinch those off, any tomatoes that I have down below, the plant won't put any energy into the new ones. It'll put all of its energy into the old tomatoes and helping them ripen and become larger fruits. So you might want to take a look at your tomato plants, and unless you're hoping to keep them through October, it's probably time to pinch back those flowers. And as I heard someone say earlier, mulching, it's time to mulch. There are lots and lots of different mulches that you can use, and we'll have a little bit of a discussion about that. But the mulch, it not only will discourage the winter annual weeds from coming up, but it will keep the ground frozen once it does freeze. There are certain types of mulching that you might not want to use because they'll encourage the ground to heat up, like plastic. So you're pretty strong to have an all-natural mulch to keep your roses. They definitely need some mulch on them in the winter, and any of your shrubs and flowering trees. This is just a picture of a summer blooming butterfly bush. And this, at this point, is probably going to be spent in the next week or two. You want to take off those flowers, but also any dead or diseased pieces to the plant. And a hydrangea bush. This is a shrub growing variety. And again, all of the flowers will eventually die. So you can deadhead those. They do dry nicely, but you can prune anything that's dead and make sure it's off the plant so that it doesn't encourage any disease or pest. And now we have a nice rose of Sharon. I've seen a lot of these out there this year. I hadn't noticed them before, but they're everywhere. They're beautiful. And again, they have almost like a cane, so those can be pruned as well with dead and dying pieces. In the top, you'll see the rose, the rugosa rose. Also, they send them as a beach rose. The bottom picture is the rose hip. So that's what happens to the rose after it blooms if you leave the rose on the shrub. Like I said, these make they're culinary uses, they're botanical beauty remedies. So if you're interested in trying to preserve your rose hips, you can do that. I know some people also let them dry and use them as potpourri. This is chickweed. This is one of those winter annual weeds that you don't want. So you definitely don't want this growing in your yard. And that way you will be able to prevent more weeds in your yard in the springtime. And we have, I believe it's golden cell and Solomon's purse. And these two are also winter weeds to look out for. So by mulching and by cleaning up, you can keep your lawn and garden rid of these weeds so that they're not there come springtime. Soil testing. I don't know if anyone here has ever had their soil tested. We do have soil test forms in the back. If you would like to take one, feel free, please. What they'll test is your pH and what nutrients you might be missing, and they will make recommendations as to what to apply and when to apply it. It will also, you can do this for your lawn, your perennial beds, your vegetable garden. And I believe it costs about $17 somewhere in there. What you do is you will take your sample and send it into the co-op extension, and they will send it to the lab for you. And you get a very nice comprehensive report, and it will tell you everything you need to know about amending your soil, because your good soil makes for good gardens. The pH is a measure of ions in the soil. We tend to learn in chemistry and in all of our different biology classes and ecology classes, the range is from 1 to 14. But for gardeners, they really are only concerned with a very, very small range. It's about 6.1 to 6.5. That's a really nice average range. Anything less is acidic, anything more is alkaline. Certain plants like acidic things. Blueberry bushes loves acidic soil, so you may have to amend certain plants to be more acid and others to be more alkaline. But in general, you want your pH to be pretty much in that average area. You can amend it with various things like lime and sulfur, so you have to know what your pH is so you know what to add. It takes a long time for this stuff to amend your soil and change it out, about 6 months. So that's why we advocate treating in the fall. That way it has the entire winter to sink into the soil and really work it and get all of the biological things going on in there going on. So the directions are actually on the sheet, but briefly, what you can do is take a sample from various parts of whether you're doing your lawn, your garden, your perennial beds. You want to take a couple samples from various places. It's like a little plug, dig about maybe 3-4 inches deep, and then mix the various samples together so they get a really true picture of what soil you're dealing with. And then you take about a half a cup of that and let it be dry and send it in. And just fill out all the information on the sheet. This is the website that you can go to, and it gives you all of the directions, but I think it's also on the form. So if you check the soil test form, it'll have directions on how to do everything. Harvest. We have cool weather crops, so we're getting started to plant those. You're looking at things that will come up quickly and be ready. You can do cool weather lettuce. You can do cool weather spinach. There are other crops you can plant them now. But you do need to watch the frost. If you hear you're getting a heavy frost the next day, probably want to pull in those tomatoes. They're not going to like it. Eggplant's not going to like that cold weather. Peppers won't like that cold weather. So those are warm weather crops you want to bring in. But if you have carrots in the ground or beets in the ground, they like the cold weather. So the longer you leave them in, the sweeter they get. Right now, I just pulled a few carrots out the other day. Some were sweet, but most of them were a little bit bitter. They really need some cool time. So I'll leave them in for a few more weeks. And the same with potatoes. I want to leave them in so they get a little bit more time to grow and not be so bitter. If anybody in here has sweet corn, has anybody grown sweet corn this year? It's my second year growing corn, and I learned a really big lesson last year. When you grow corn, you have to have a fence. Because if you don't, by the time your corn gets to be beautiful and looks like you might get to eat it, somebody else is going to come in and eat it, and they will eat everything. So this year we did a little fence, so hopefully we'll get some corn. But the recommendation is that when the corn is ready to be picked, you should pick it early in the morning so it preserves the sugars so that it doesn't take all day. As it goes on in the day, it loses a little bit more sugar, and keep it nice and cool. So it likes that cool air to keep the sugars going. But definitely make sure you have a fence for that. This is the time to start that vegetable garden cleanup. You can start cleaning up the spent tomatoes, the spent peppers. If you have all kinds of crops that are done, your beans or cucumbers, it's time to pull those and get them in. A lot of those green, very nice green plants, they're still useful. Throw them in the compost heap. They will rot and they'll give you great compost in a year or so. But caveat to that, if you had blight on your tomatoes, don't put it in your compost. You're better off just trashing it or putting it in or burning it. You could, but you have to make sure that the heat in that compost is very high in order to kill any of the pathogens that are still in it. So, and that the blight's a fungus, so it's going to stick around. It won't just die through the winter. If you would like to prevent weeds in your garden, you can sow a cover crop. Oats are a very good cover crop. Rye is a very good cover crop. And this is the time to do it. You plant it, it grows in about 3 to 4 weeks, and then when it's time, you can just till it under. And all of that cover crop now adds nutrients back into your soil. So it'll keep the weeds down, it'll add some really good nutrients. It might not look very pretty for a few weeks, but in the end, it will definitely help your garden. And this is we'll be probably planting that in the next few weeks. And onions, we're going to show you a picture in a minute. You want the neck leaves to be really dry. If you take them out and you get and they're green, you can risk some types of rot. So here is a pile. This is just refuse. This is not compost. You can see there's some, there are a few little holes in there. I have a mouse. Oh, there we go. There's some little holes in those leaves. Depending on what those came from, it's probably okay to put it in the compost. And again, all of these things, all of these pieces can go in the compost. This is the compost back here. So your compost needs some brown and some green. This is your green. You want to get that in there so it rots. And it will rot. The only thing you have to make sure of is it's free of disease and that there are no bugs like living in it. But if you had something that had, say, maybe the tomato hornworm came in and ate all the leaves off your tomato plant, the worm is gone, so the tomato plant itself is okay to throw in the compost. are onions that are ready to pull out of the ground, but they're not ready for storage because those tall, long leaves they're not quite dry yet. So you could just like let them lay out and let them dry out, and they would eventually dry, and then you could store them for the winter. When you store these kind of crops for the winter, it's good to have them in the basement where it's nice and cool, so that usually our basements maintain about a 50 to 55 degree temp. So they will keep these things in a nice cool temperature that's even. Why our ancestors have root cellars. October. I know it's not yet September, we're talking about October, but it will be here faster than we can even imagine. So again, we'll be talking about lawn things for October, planting, pruning, mulching, soil, the harvest, and composting. Now you're going to take that mower height and take it even shorter. That grass does not need to be tall in the fall. It doesn't have time to dry out, and it just encourages all kinds of disease and mold. So you definitely want to shorten your mower blade even more. At the end of the month, you can feed your lawn, and that saves you of feeding in early spring. So you can get kind of a jump on it. All of that will just stay over the winter and feed the roots, and in the spring they'll come back up. And if you're going to put any compost on top of your lawn, make sure that you sift it with a fine sift, so you screen, so that you don't have clumps forming on top of grass. This is matted grass, and you can see that looks like it's just going to harbor a lot of nasty stuff. It will harbor mold, and there are a couple of different molds. There's a snow gray mold and pink snow mold. This is pink snow mold. If you didn't know better, you would think it looks like that's a dog spot, but it's not. It's actually mold. You can tell by the pink ring around it, and that it does get a mold on the grass, and it will kill that part of the turf. Planting. Right now is the best time to get the really good deals when you go to the nursery, because a lot of times they're trying to get rid of their plants for the year. Trees are great, shrubs are great, perennials are great to pick up right now. You want to make sure you're at a reputable place. If you go to some place that's just selling them super cheap to get rid of them, you might not get really healthy plants. So check and make sure you have a healthy plant. Planting the tree and shrub now gives it plenty of time to get its roots in and get deep. And like I said before, you want to water deeply, about once a week, to make sure that the plants are getting enough water and the roots are getting established. Also a great time to plant bulbs. I live in Dunbarton, and we have a campaign going on about planting daffodils. They're trying to plant 250,000 daffodils throughout the town by 2015. We aren't quite there yet, but if you do drive through in the springtime, all along Route 13, from between Goffstown and Dunbarton, are daffodils everywhere. They're all along the roadside. So it's a good time to plant those, and make sure you plant them at the right depth and add a little bit of feed to them when they go in the ground. Great thing about daffies, nothing likes to eat them. No squirrels, no chipmunks, no voles, the moles, the deer, nobody likes to eat them. So they're great for that. The other great thing you can plant, you can do all your fall, the bulbs that need that cold wintering, tulip bulbs are a great time to plant them now. And if you don't want to have critters eating your tulip bulbs, plant a little row of daffodils in front of them, make a little border or ring around them of daffies, and it'll help protect your tulips. Good time to plant garlic. Garlic will overwinter and will come up the next spring. You can add some blood meal to them to help them grow. It's almost like a little feed, a little extra boost. And the one thing I've learned about garlic is it needs a deep place to grow. They like to have deep roots. So I have had extra cloves or pieces that I've planted in shallow beds, and they don't do very well. They will come up, but then they just die. They flutter over and die. So it's best to have a really very nice deep bed where you have tilled the soil and those roots can grow deep, so they can make a nice tall stalk, and you'll get a nice head. You can also sow seeds for cool weather crops in October. These are seeds not for cool weather crops, but for spring crops. So you can put your carrot seeds and lettuce and onions and beets, and they'll just sit there all winter long and wait and wait and wait. And when the time is right in spring, they'll sprout, and you'll probably have forgotten that they were there. So you need to make sure it's a place that you won't be tilling or walking over, that it's just a special spot that you've already planted, pre-planted those seeds. But they will come up. And some of the herbs, dill, parsley, coriander, also known as cilantro, those are all herbs that you can do the same thing with. Mulching. I'm going to talk a little bit about this. You definitely want to mulch a lot of your flower beds. Your roses definitely need it. They do not like to be cold before it gets too frozen, when the ground begins to freeze. Really good mulch for that is leaves. However, since we all have lots of leaves, it's free and it's, you know, abundant in most yards. But you'd like to get those chopped. They will decompose and they will feed back into the ground for your shrubs and your flowers and your roses. But if you chop them up, they'll help to decompose faster. As I said before, the great thing about the leaves or the mulch on at this point is it's to help keep the ground frozen. If your ground heats and contracts too much during the winter, as we all know, it causes frost heaves. It does that to your plants too, and it can mess around with their root systems and break the plants and harm them. So if you have especially roses that are delicate like that, it's a good idea to mulch them with some sort of mulch. Like I mentioned before, if you use a plastic as a mulch, it will keep the weeds down, but it will also help keep the ground up. So in this case, you probably don't want to use a plastic. You want to use something more organic around your shrubs and your roses and things. Ornamental grasses can also, at this point, you're going to chop those down, you might as well use them, don't waste it. You can put those grasses back into mulch and use that as mulch in your beds as well. Just as I know some people use grass clippings in the summertime for their mulch. You can use your ornamentals. So
how short do you chop them?
The ornamentals, I'm not really sure about that. You'd have to consult like a pruning guide. We have a pruning handout in the back. Take a look in there. It may actually tell you, because you don't want to. I don't think you want to go all the way to the ground. You want to leave some. So just consult the guide because it depends on the variety of grass as well. Strawberry beds also need to be mulched if you have one. They have little crowns that kind of can push up through the ground, so they need mulch as well. Just a light bed of mulch to cover them and keep the ground at a steady temperature throughout the season. And now is the time to get those soils fixed. As I said before, we have 6 months of downtime, and this is when it takes all that time to get the lime or sulfur or whatever you're adding into your mix to get it in there. It's a good time to apply limestone. So that's not just to your lawn, but to whatever you have that needs the lime. And they recommend that every few years you add it to things like clematis, lavender, delphiniums, gypsophilia, lilacs, and dianthus. So just as a general rule of thumb, to go ahead and add that. And the harvest in October is a little different. If you have any tomatoes still out there, it's time to get them off the vine and in. If they're green, you can wrap each one in a piece of newspaper and put it in a bag or a basket or bucket in a cool place, and it will ripen in about 2 to 3 weeks. You can also layer them in a basket, cover them with newspaper, put another layer, cover it, and they will still ripen, so they're not throwaways. There are also lots of great recipes to use green tomatoes, so you can use them for your dinner if you like. Pumpkins and winter squash will last in a cool spot for a very long time. They will last most of the winter if you have a cool enough spot for them to stay. Pumpkins, again, we have so many varieties, and squash, so many varieties, so you need to really consult what variety you have and how long it will store. And the last thing on this page is don't store your fruits and veggies together. They don't like each other very much. They have off gases that they produce. Apples in particular love to take on the odor of stronger smelling things like garlic and onions, so no one wants their apples tasting like onions. The same goes for potatoes and onions. Sometimes they have problems cohabitating and they will cause each other to rot faster just because of the gases that they produce. So here we have a picture of green tomatoes. So you can see they can be sliced and you can eat them. Just you have to make sure that you season them and flavor them so that they're edible. And onions, as you can see, that these onions no longer have the tops on them. They've dried and they've come off, and these are now ready to store. And apples. And as I said, you don't want to store the two together or they'll start to taste, you'll get that oniony taste in your apples and that won't be pleasant. Clean up and compost. One of the most important things that can be done at this time of year, and should be done throughout the season, is to keep things clean, keep things tidy. Because the more messy it is, the more things that you have out there, you can harbor disease and pests, and once they get in, it's harder to get rid of them. So if you can prevent these things from happening, all better. You want to make sure that all of your annuals that are now dead and have died, from snapdragon annuals to marigolds, and those plants, even though they're dead, they can go into the compost heap. They will rot and they will provide nutrients for later on. And the leaves, as I said, you don't bag those leaves. You don't want to be using them for anything but mulch. Mulch and compost, because they do provide a great source of nutrients in the compost heap. Anything that's fallen on the ground, if you have fruit trees and you have apples or crab apples, they fall on the ground and you really probably don't want to eat them, but they're still good to throw in the compost and get them in there and let them add their bit and piece to the compost equation. Anything that's from the perennial garden, when you cut back your perennials, you can throw all of those things in the compost heap too. They all cook, they all rot, and then they become really great compost when you go in the following year. It's just nice and friable and dark and smells nice and sweet. It's good to put in the ground. As I said before, any kind of leaf, you can use oak, you can use maple, it doesn't matter. It's good to chop them up though. So if you mow them and then break them up and throw them on, or if you can chop them up just with pruners or something, you can weed whacker, then you can put them on and they'll rot a little bit better. One of the big things that I can't emphasize enough, and we tend to, sometimes everybody's a little lazy, is to disinfect your tools. And you should be doing this throughout the season as you use them, your pruning shears, just any kind of clippers that you use to cut things. These need to be cleaned and kept well kept. You don't want any rust on them, and you don't want any diseases on them. So you can clean them with a light bleach solution, or rubbing alcohol also works very, very well. If you have a little bit of rust, you can use some steel wool. Last year I left a beautiful pair of clippers out in the garden, forgot about them. I spent the winter there, and they had a beautiful, beautiful rust sheen on them when I found them this spring. So they were not salvageable. So make sure that all your tools are in good working order. Take an inventory and see, is there something you need, something that's broken, something that needs repair, something you need to buy new, just so that everything is in order when you go to start up again next spring. This is a compost barrel. You put your debris in there and you let it sit. Sometimes you can get additives for these kinds of composts and it will speed up that whole process. But you can put it in there, and a lot of these claim that in 6 months you will have completely rotted compost ready for your garden. Or this is the more economical way. You can get these things at the hardware store, very inexpensive, very easy to put up. And it has to have air, so there's airflow through this wire mesh, and it needs some water and it needs sunlight, and all of that will decompose. And this might take a little while longer, but eventually it's going to become really nice compost too. This is a 3-bin unit, and basically you can start one, and when that one gets full, go to the next one, and so on. So at all times, you should have compost going in each bin, and one will finish sooner than the next one, so at all times you should be taking the compost out and it's ready to use. This is for larger scale home production or commercial production. This is another inexpensive alternative. You can use cinder blocks. You can see in the top there's little green posts that hold the cinder blocks in place, and those, it's a very good alternative to the wire mesh. It still allows a little airflow because of the size, and it keeps everything nice and neat in there so it rots. And this is another compost bin that's a big, these are becoming very popular because they're nice and you don't have to look at the mess. But they can be kind of expensive, so something to consider if you're thinking about building a compost bin. This one's made from wood pallets, which is also very inexpensive. You can probably get these at Home Depot or Lowe's or your hardware store, Agway, for free, and then just nail them together. Again, keeps things neat and has the airflow. So a few other little things that you can do to get everything ready for winter. To clean out the gutters. If you leave things, debris in your gutters, it also harbors disease and pests. I just had mine cleaned out. I actually had little seedlings of trees growing in my gutters. They hadn't been done in a while. Any faucets that you have that are not frost-free, make sure you turn everything off and blow out your systems, especially if you have irrigation. You need to get that blown out, and you need to make sure that any plumbing that's not frost-free is cleaned out.